Take a look at New York City. Here, Black people are being arrested and stopped at almost twice the rate as the average New Yorker. Now, if you went over to Tulsa, Oklahoma, being Black means you are 2.7 times more likely to be subjected to physical force by police officers than white people. Now zoom out, and the story nationally doesn't change. For example, data shows that across the US, police officers stop Black drivers at higher rates than white drivers. This is often called overpolicing. It happens when communities either face a large police presence in their daily lives or face aggressive policing for minor offenses, and sometimes for nothing at all.
It's this broader sort of narrative of who belongs and who doesn't, which allows certain groups to tap in the police department, to use the police department, or to weaponize the police department in ways that are conducive to violence against Black people.
And overpolicing can have deadly results. In 2016, Philando Castile was fatally shot during a traffic stop. An NPR investigation found he had been stopped at least 46 times in 14 years. In fact, according to a research paper, 1 in every 1,000 Black men and boys can expect to be killed by police. Can a Biden administration even do anything to help fix this problem? To understand how we got to this place today where Black communities are aggressively policed, we need to take a closer look at some of the historical reasons and systemic conditions that made it all possible.
Not only is the gentrification taking place whereby new, wealthier, predominantly white residents are moving in, we also have to think about where Black residents are moving to and how policing sort of has an impact on that entire process.
In order to understand why Black communities are policed the way they are, we have to talk about housing discrimination.
So right around the 1900s is when our urbanization really started to take root. And so what did we need to have in place to make it just grow across the whole country? And that is a massive system of infrastructure.
During World War I, urbanization brought the promise of booming socioeconomic growth. It's also one of the many reasons why millions of Black people relocated from the Jim Crow South to the North, West, and Midwestern regions of the United States. But just as countless Blacks moved, policies were being rolled out to keep neighborhoods white. And the crazy part about it was, just like segregation in the South, all of this was very much legal.
To understand how this market was structured, you have to understand the mechanisms that allowed it to happen through things like race covenants and redlining, which work together to limit who can own and who can buy and who can get credit. And so now you're isolating people, you're telling them you have to live here.
So what are these mechanisms and how did they work in the real world? Redlining is basically a framework to determine how desirable a neighborhood is based on race. This is how it went.
When we're assessing these neighborhoods, there's basically 4 rankings. The green, that was the highest ranking, and it was like, vibrant homes, people are working, rents are high, no subversive racial elements. It was not integrated. And then you had a blue rank that was like, yes, really strong neighborhood, but a little closer to places that are racially integrated. Then you have the yellow that was next to a redlined space. And so it was in danger, you didn't know which way it was going to go, but it was next to the redlined space. And then you would have the redlined places where they would say, look at the detrimental influences of the neighborhood, and one of those was the lack of race covenants.
And what were race covenants? Well, those were deeds that told people they could only sell property to whites. Banks also ruled out making loans and mortgages in certain neighborhoods regardless of the applicant's finances.
So it wasn't really any formal mortgage industry. So you saw that the ability to control housing markets through race was very easy then. So by designing the marketplace around rules that revolve around color, we should not be surprised that we see this racial spatial wealth gap today, because that's how it started.
This wouldn't end until 1968, when the NAACP got Congress to pass the Fair Housing Act. The act banned discrimination regarding the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and sex. So how did race covenants and other housing ordinances impact Black Americans today? To start with, it stalled the socioeconomic growth of an entire generation, which furthered inequity between Black and white Americans. Persistent residential segregation since then has led to the hyper-surveillance of Black communities by police. Today, the language of so-called law and order is often based in the same racist fear-mongering that redlining and race covenants were based on, stoking white fear of Black people.
And so you create these fears because you have to enforce. And this becomes the implicit bias. And this is what we use in how we distribute public finance dollars, infrastructure dollars. Who gets the roads? Who gets the light rails? Who gets the schools? Who gets the STEM programs? Who gets health care? Who gets tested for COVID? And you see how this all happens all the way up to today.
But it's not just exclusion by design that has led to the overpolicing of Black communities. At least 2 sitting U.S. presidents would further this divide by also declaring war against Black Americans. For much of the 1960s, U.S. cities were shaken by a series of protests and rebellions against racism and racist policing. A new wave of anti-racist activism was born, from civil rights movement protests to more militant challenges to the racist power structure from the likes of Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party.
A policeman in a Black community is a licensed killer. He's a licensed killer. A Black man attacking a policeman is a rioter. Yeah. That's because the Black man don't have the license to kill.
Then President Lyndon B. Johnson likened the uprisings to, get this, a war, which in turn likened Black American citizens to a hostile population under occupation. That helped further solidify the justification for Black communities to be policed in America. LBJ did this by getting the Law Enforcement Assistance Act passed by Congress. This led to today's equivalent of $223 million being funneled to the Department of Justice. The money outfitted the police forces like soldiers the U.S. government sent to Vietnam and Latin America. These policies would make it easier for presidents like Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton to normalize the hyper-surveillance and over-policing of Black neighborhoods. Nixon and Reagan would do this through their war on drugs campaigns. This would disproportionately lead to the mass incarceration of Black Americans. Under Clinton, it would turn into the National Defense Authorization Act of '97, which gifted surplus military equipment to law enforcement agencies across the country. This has led to a pattern of racial inequity and injustice across policing and the criminal justice system today. Between 2001 and 2010, Black Americans were 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana charges compared to white Americans. And despite being just 5% of all substance users, Black Americans made up almost 30% of all drug-related arrests.
Not only does inequality increase one's likelihood of having criminal justice contact, but we know that the criminal justice system also increases levels of inequality.
So basically, housing discrimination laws, the withdrawal of resources, the war on crime, the war on drugs, are all connected to why Black neighborhoods are over-policed today. But there's one more thing we have to address when we talk about policing of Black neighborhoods: gentrification. In New York, that's resulted in higher law enforcement presence by the NYPD, and the new residents, who are often white, are partly to blame for this.
The broader sort of issue that I think we need to keep in mind when we think about this relationship between gentrification and policing is that we need to be concerned about the extent to which gentrification in some way is conducive to fueling greater levels of anti-Blackness, right? What we're really talking about here is the extent to which Black people are now perceived to belong in these spaces.
And that's what often happens when neighborhoods gentrify. A large influx of white residents turns into an increase of quality of life complaints. That's complaints against things like noise and loitering. And those complaints often lead to arrests in lower income communities of color.
So now you see how they all work together. Now you have this displacement and people move because of this displacement. And now you have new places that are devalued and new places get gentrified. And it's cyclical, and it's like in 20-year cycles, and you can see this stuff, and it just keeps happening in waves.
In 2020, Defund the Police became a rallying cry of nationwide protests. Grassroots organizations and activists called for divesting funds from police forces and reallocating them to things like housing and social services. But President-elect Biden doesn't support any move to defund police departments.
What I support is the police having the opportunity to deal with the problems they face. And I'm totally opposed to defunding the police offices.
And instead backs efforts to reform them. But even that has opposition. But overpolicing doesn't happen in a vacuum. Overpolicing is connected to an ingrained racist system that prioritizes the needs of white Americans over the safety of Black Americans. And that ultimately translates to the policing carried out in neighborhoods across the United States.
So there are many different ways by which Black people and Black spaces are policed. We have to pay attention to this issue of stop and frisk. We have to pay attention to the issue of excessive force, but we also have to be aware of these more sort of mundane ways, more common ways by which people are unfairly treated by the police and the criminal justice system overall.